Yes, thank you, Karen, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to Jessica Poli, Maria Allegre, and Shannon Mormon from the Gulf Coast Consortia for putting this together and working behind the scenes to make it hopefully a very valuable presentation. So I'm going to kind of kick things off, and basically our goals today are to demystify the grant writing process for the K99 and ROO. It's a very sought after award. Karen informed me that over the past 10 years, only about 56 or 58 K99s and ROOs have been awarded in the Houston and Galveston area. So it's a kind of slim piece of the pie. However, that doesn't mean that they're completely out of reach, and hopefully today we can discuss some strategies and go over some of the requirements to help you decide if this award is right for you to pursue, given the stage in your career. You should have received an agenda going over what we'll do today. What I would like to do is start off with just a quick icebreaker poll. This is just very informal. Our first question is, what have you been watching lately? Oops. And our second question is, what do you see as the biggest hurdle to securing grant-supported research funding? These are your own opinions. And it's interesting to collect a little survey data at the top of our meeting. So we'll give about, Jessica will let us know when folks have answered. I myself have a 6-month-old daughter here at the house. So I'm selecting that I have no time for streaming. Jessica, how are we doing on our poll results?
We have 36 people that have responded, 37. So there's still a few more trickling, but.
Okay. Well, since that's active, I will just tell you a little bit more about myself. Karen kind of covered all the major aspects, but here at Rice University in the Office of Proposal Development, what I typically do is assist PIs or faculty members with their applications for federal funding for their research projects. And a lot of that has to do with understanding what it is the funder is looking for. So I'm hoping that I can give you some of that knowledge for this particular NIH program. Okay, we have some results here. Netflix reigns supreme. It's like the first and the best. That's interesting to me. And then I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm unable to see the bottom. I think there's something wrong with my system here. Jessica, are you able to scroll down?
Yes, I did. Here, let me stop sharing and then I'll share again. There you go. So 40.
Oh, thank you so much.
Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. So if you are seeing the results of the poll, it's almost half of you are saying preparing and writing the proposal are your biggest hurdles or biggest fears in terms of pursuing grant funding. And I can understand that. A very low amount of you pick time management, which is interesting. I feel like writing, preparing the proposal, and time management go hand in hand. Defining your research goals, a good portion of you are interested in learning more about that. And yeah, the review process as well. So we'll go over a lot of these today, and hopefully we will emerge with a little bit more confidence, a little bit more knowledge about what we're doing and why we want to do it. We had a bit of assigned reading ahead of the meeting. This is an article called 10 Common Grant Writing Mistakes. I just want to go through this very quickly. It's kind of good nuts and bolts, foundational stuff to consider when writing a proposal. For some of you, your K99 might be your first proposal. For others, you might have been involved in projects. And it's good to understand, what the best practices are. So square pegs and round holes was the first point. your project does not fit in with the funder guidelines, it's important to study and respond effectively to the funder's call. Poor planning. You don't have a good outline or timeline for achieving your goals. So we need to make sure that those are well defined in that 1 page or 1 paragraph project summary document. The loner, you're going at this by yourself. You need to secure support from collaborators. And of course, for the K99 in particular, your mentor or advisors need to play a pretty big role in what you're proposing. Promising too much or too little. This is an issue of scope. And again, it goes back to the funder's call and what they wish to do. Sometimes looking at past awarded projects to sort of align yours with a similar scope could be helpful. Throwing spaghetti. Again, I have a baby daughter who's just started to engage with solid food. So this is very appropriate to me. Throwing too much at the wall. You basically want to narrow your research direction and narrow your goals. Running in place, your objectives are not attainable. I mean, kind of running around in circles, or maybe your research plan is built on objectives that are too dependent on the prior objective. So you want to set smart and achievable goals. We'll go over what that means later. Death by 1,000 cuts. This is an interesting one where maybe you've gotten too much feedback or you're bringing down the other research in your field a little bit too much. So you want to accentuate the positive, frame your project in a positive light as filling a niche, as responding to a gap, and as being a very proactive method for achieving something great. Methods madness. Maybe there's too much technical information in your approach. Grant proposals, while needing to be sophisticated and written for an educated audience, also need to be balanced with a more general, broad considerations. The so what question, the big question for grants is why? Why is this important? What is it doing? And part of the way to address that is to appeal to educated non-experts as well as folks in your field. Finally, feedback fatigue. You've gotten tons of feedback. You're not really sure where to go. The writing process can be very, very tiring. It's important to take a step back and think about your audience. So that's a little bit of a review of our assigned reading. I hope you go back to that and find it helpful in the future. Let's start here with an NIH overview. Most of you are probably familiar with this agency. It's nestled under the US Department of Health and Human Services. And then under NIH are a slew of ICs, or institutes and centers, that are devoted to research within a particular field or for a particular discipline. But basically, this is the world's largest source of medical research funding, the driving force behind decades of advances that have expanded fundamental scientific knowledge and improved health. I think those, looking at this language is very important. Fundamental scientific knowledge and improved health. We're going to see versions of those ideas throughout the stated missions and focuses of the NIH. Let's look at their mission statement. To seek fundamental knowledge, again, about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. Important to consider the language they're using, and also important to consider it for your own research. How does your research or your work work to advance this mission? Important for the funder, important for you. Beneath the mission of NIH is the focus of NIH, and this sort of nesting organization is important. You might want to consider mirroring that in your own applications. So to carry out this mission, NIH supports a number of initiatives: basic research to fuel progress, translational research to move basic discoveries forward, clinical research to turn discoveries into prevention, treatments, and cures, a creative and diverse workforce, i.e. you, since people are our most important resource, and a balanced research portfolio to ensure high return on investment for US taxpayers. A big, perhaps unstated focus of many of these federal agencies is to keep the US competitive in this field. So thinking about how your goals and your objectives align with that is important as well. So underneath, again, we're nesting. Underneath the focus, we have goals. The goals of the NIH are to foster fundamental creative discoveries, innovative research strategies, and their applications as a basis for ultimately protecting and improving health, to develop, maintain, and renew scientific, human, and physical resources that will ensure the nation's capability to prevent disease, to expand the knowledge base in medical and associated sciences in order to enhance the nation's economic well-being and ensure a continued high return on the public investment in research, and to exemplify and to promote the highest level of scientific integrity, public accountability, and social responsibility in the conduct of science. They want not only good research and good methods, they want ethical methods to be promoted here as well. Within those goals, we have objectives. So take note of how these are organized. In realizing these goals, NIH provides leadership and direction to programs designed to improve the health of the nation by conducting and supporting research in the causes, diagnosis, and prevention and cure of human diseases, in the processes of human growth and development, in the biological effects of environmental contaminants, in the understanding of mental, addictive, and physical disorders, and in directing programs for the collection, dissemination, and exchange of information in medicine and health, including the development and support of medical libraries and the training of medical librarians and other health information specialists. So in pursuance of this goal, NIH lists these objectives. It's important to look at this language very, very carefully, perhaps select keywords and phrases that appeal to your unique ability, your unique research focus. See how you fill in those objectives and fit that niche. I'm sorry to read all of these slides to you. It's important though, and if we're considering the grant writing process, to be sure that we are speaking and writing to the correct audience. So let's look at the numbers a little bit. These are from 2020. The last fiscal year numbers have not quite been released yet. I find that it's very important to kind of get a sense of what's out there, what's being funded. So in 2020, over 55,000 applications were received and over 11,000 awards were made for a success rate of 21%. You might find that a little discouraging. I tend to find that encouraging in some ways. 21,332 grants is quite a few. So considering the tools that are at your disposal in your current placements, considering the training that you've received already, ask yourself if this is the right time for you to go after an NIH award. We're going to zero in a little bit here on the K awards. So NIH has a number of different award mechanisms. K denotes a career development award. R denotes a research project award. The K99 ROO, as you might understand, is a sort of synthesis of the career development and independent research awards. So as indicated by the NIH mission and objectives, one of the things they focus on are career development. This is kind of the pipeline as it's presented on their website. And right here in the kind of purple area is kind of where you occupy. So we want the K99 ROO to bring us from our postdoctoral engagement and studies and into independent research awards and academic careers. Let's look at how they define K99, or I'm sorry, the CDA awards. The purpose of the Career Development Award is to provide candidates at the postdoctoral, early career, and mid-career stages with opportunities to build on their initial research training and to further develop their research careers through individual or institutional awards. So they are giving you the building blocks to and providing you with funding to have a solid foundation with which to launch yourself into independence. Let's look at some of the numbers for the Career Development Awards. This is also from 2020, a slightly higher success rate than the overall NIH awards. About a third of them get awarded across the board. If you look a little bit at the graph I've included here, we're kind of on an upward trajectory in terms of the number of applications, while the number of awards have more or less stayed the same. So important to consider that as well. Like I said, there's a number of different funding mechanisms and avenues you can take within the K award category. We're going to be looking at the bottom one, the K99 ROO. It's a very unique award. But there are a number of other avenues as well. If you find that the K99 ROO is not for you, you can always look at some of these other ones as well. Let's look specifically at the K99 success rate here. I don't quite have the data to support a success rate, but we do know the number of K99s awarded in 2020, 542, pretty encouraging. And I'm also very encouraged by the upward trend we've seen over the last 13 years or so. So why the K99? Why is this so desired? Why is this one the one that most postdocs want to at least have a shot at applying for? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think it eases the transition into independence, one. And secondly, it's a good proving ground. So there was a study, I included this quote in your introductory packet for this presentation from Circulation Research. And the study found that for cardiovascular K awards, a specific IC, the PIs were more successful in obtaining subsequent grant support than those who did not apply for K99s. There was a similar publication rate and quality for all groups, but the K99 group was most persistent in applying for the next grant. Why is that, do you think? Well, I think the requirements, this is one person's opinion, but I think the requirements for the K99 are so robust, the process for preparing an application is so thorough that you're basically training yourself to speak for yourself and devise a plan that is attractive to funders. It may not have been the right plan or the right proposal for the K99, but it prepared you to go after subsequent grant funding. The K99 ROO has 3 different awards, and it's all dependent both on your IC, given your particular field, and to the nature of your project. So as you can see in these 3 sort of rectangles, there are 3. One is independent clinical trial not allowed, independent clinical trial required, and then a separate category for independent basic experimental studies with human subjects required, which human subjects and IRB approval, as you may be aware, require a bit more legwork, a bit more paperwork to kind of get through the door. Let's look at some of the requirements here in the parent announcement. And I would study this very, very thoroughly. You can find all of these online. So you'll want to kind of Google or locate it on the NIH website. Familiarize yourself with the table of institute and center specific information requirements and staff contacts, very important. You may want to reach out to a program officer, and you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the correct party. So here's a little screenshot of what this document looks like. We sometimes call this a funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, or sometimes an RFP, a request for proposals. These are all publicly available. You want to make sure that they are current. So by looking at the dates listed, and you want to make sure that it is the correct award that you're looking for. You don't want to spend a lot of time crafting an application that isn't responding to the correct award mechanism. And as you can see, the components of participating organizations, there's a long list of the different institutes and centers that you may want to familiarize yourself. Specific purpose of the K99 ROO is to increase and maintain a strong cohort of new and talented NIH-supported independent investigators. They are investing in you. They want to facilitate a timely transition of outstanding postdoctoral researchers with a research and/or clinical doctorate degree from mentored postdoctoral research positions to independent tenure track or equivalent faculty positions. They want to see the postdocs smoothly make their transition into independence as academic researchers. They want to provide independent NIH research support during this transition in order to help awardees launch competitive independent research careers, to foster the development of a creative independent research program that will be competitive for subsequent independent funding and that will help advance the mission of the NIH. There are some eligibility requirements to consider. The PI's visa must allow him or her to remain in the US for the duration of the relevant phase of the award if they are not a US citizen. You must have a research or clinical doctoral degree, and you must currently be in a mentored postdoctoral training position. There's also a window of eligibility to consider, and this is very important. You must have no more than 4 years postdoctoral research experience at the time of the initial, or in the case of resubmission, subsequent applications. Pardon me. Eligibility requirements continued. This is intended for individuals who require at least 12 months of mentored research training and career development that will help them then transition to that independent phase. These are intended for an individual who could not provide a compelling rationale for at least 1 year of additional mentored research training at the time of the award is not a strong candidate. Important to consider, who your current mentor is, what research are they engaged in? Can you work within that arrangement, and can you then take your preliminary research with you to your independent phase? Very important to consider. If an applicant achieves independence before K99 award is made, neither the K99 nor the ROR award will be given. Important. Okay, so here's how it's broken down. It's a 5-year award. You've heard maybe mentors ask for a 5-year plan. Well, this really puts it into practice. So there are 2 phases. The K99 is the mentored phase, and the ROO represents the independent research phase. The K99 phase is 1 to 2 years of mentored support, a very good reason for that mentored support. And the award amount is typically determined by the salary and research costs, and is determined by the awarding institute or center, IC. To apply for your K99, you must identify a mentor who will supervise the proposed career development and research experience, and engage in training activities, other professional development opportunities, maybe provide support and resources along the way. You're also encouraged to identify more than one mentor if you're able to. So the mentor relationship is a very important one as a sort of prerequisite for your K99 award. Mentors should be an active investigator in the area of the proposed research. They should have a successful track record of mentoring individuals at the candidate's career stage. They should be committed to the career development of the candidate and the direct supervision of the research. And they should be able to document the availability of sufficient research support and facilities for high quality research. Federal agencies are very interested in your current position and your current institute or organization's capacity to pull off what you're proposing. They don't want to grant you the money if they don't feel like you have the ability or the facilities to pull it off. We'll go into some of those budget requirements in a moment. For the mentor phase, the award expectation are you must have a full-time appointment at the academic institution. A minimum of 75% of full-time effort will be covered during the mentor phase. And you may engage in other duties as part of the remaining 25%, as long as such duties do not interfere with or detract from the proposed career development program. They don't want any sort of double dipping or overlap. If NIH is supporting a particular research direction, they want to be sort of the grantor for that research. Now we'll look at the independent phase, the ROO phase. So this is the remaining 3 years. It's up to 3 years of independent support, and it's contingent on satisfactory progress during the K99 phases, and receiving an approved independent tenure track or equivalent faculty position at an academic institution. The award amount is determined, it is set at $249,000 per year. The key thing to note when applying, you're not going to know exactly where you're going to end up at this independent phase quite yet. So that budget amount is sort of pro forma. You won't need to itemize it necessarily at this stage. When you do transition to the ROO, you'll then submit a more specific budget related to your specific research costs. There are always questions about budget, so I want to make sure I address them as well as I can. I tend to work on the pre-award side of things, and I tend to work with the text of the proposal. There are other folks out there, resources, administrative offices, sponsored project offices, who can help you with your budget when you get to that point. Again, the minimum is 75% of your full-time 12-month professional effort. That's 9 person months in their parlance. And the 9 person months need not to be devoted exclusively to the RO supported research, but they want to make sure that you are devoting a good amount of your effort to what you're proposing. Other program related expenses may include tuition and fees related to career development activities, supplies, equipment, and technical personnel. You need having a good list of collaborators and other personnel related to the project shows that you have foresight and you have support needed to pull it off. Travel to research meetings or training, maybe networking events, maybe conferences, and statistical services, including personnel and computer time. Federal agencies are very interested in the evaluation tools and assessment methods that you are going to put forth. They want to make sure that there are mechanisms and measurements involved in ensuring a successful project. And that may include some data analysis help from your institution. So let's move into what we're talking about in career development. I mentioned the 5-year plan. And we might be at a stage, you might be at a stage where you know exactly what you want to do with your K99, or you might be at a stage where you're not sure what you want to do, and you might just be here because you're exploring a possibility, and all that's fine. Let's go into what we mean by career development and how to articulate your goals and objectives. Again, the K99 is about you largely. It's also about your research, but it's about you. They want to invest in you, as well as your transformative research. So I highlighted these words in blue. These are my words. These are not NIH words, but I think it's important to demonstrate that you are a unique researcher, that you have a unique thing to offer your field, and that you have a plan to stay curious, clinical, and engaged throughout your career, and that this will be a launching pad for that career. So in addition to the significance, innovation, and approach of the research plan, those words are in red for a very good reason. The K99 requires a candidate section. So this is a section of the proposal all about you, written from your perspective. It's broken down into several subheadings or subsections that include your background, your career goals and objectives, your plans for career development, plans for training activities during the award period, a justification for the mentored phase, and plans for transition to independence. How will your mentor be helping you? What will you be doing? How will you make that transition? When do you propose to do it? A timeline with milestones, as well as methods for evaluation, benchmarks, and having a pretty clear plan across months, years is very important to NIH. So let's zero in on a particular requirement, pretty much applicable to all NIH proposals. And it's really 3 requirements that I'm talking about here. There's a specific aims, a project summary, and a project narrative. I'm talking specifically about NIH proposals when I use these phrases. Other federal funding agencies like NSF might call a project summary one thing, and then a project summary at NIH means something completely different. So read those guidelines and reread them. I just want to go over these as great opportunities to promote, market, and to promote and market yourself and your research and make a really good first impression. Here are the reasons why. Often these are the only parts of the proposal that all reviewers on your panel will have an opportunity to read. They're the shortest parts of the proposal. You want to be able to provide a conceptual overview. So maybe your research is highly technical. These components kind of force you to squeeze it down and leave the jargon elsewhere. You want to be able to outline 3 key things: goals, objectives, and expected outcomes. We'll go over exactly the exact difference between goals and objectives in the next slide. Must be clearly written. We want to envision a broad but educated audience. I don't want you to skew too broad. We want to be able to maybe describe your project in layman's terms, but keep in mind too that the panel reviewing your proposal is a panel of experts. They've been assembled for a reason. they'll understand typically what you're promoting, but you want to be able to also consider that these are publicly available documents. These are the documents that will be published online, will be presented to Congress for taxpayer reasons and lawmaking reasons. And they're really a good opportunity to kind of market and sell yourself. So they really want to grab that the reviewer's attention as well as you can, and generate some enthusiasm as well. Yes, and so each of these three components must be able to stand alone. They might say the same thing in different ways, and they all have kind of different length requirements. So the specific aims page is 1 page, a ½ inch margin, important to note. And that's provides a little bit more detail around goals, objectives, outcomes, maybe a reflection on the mentored phase and the training activities, and maybe a consideration of the other personnel who might be involved. The project summary is 30 lines of text. So think of it as sort of a detailed abstract that might accompany a journal article of roughly that kind of length. And then the project narrative, don't be confused by the term narrative, is only 3 sentences. This is also known as the public health relevance statement. And in a few minutes, we're going to break out into rooms and just have a little conversation in small groups about your intended research relevance, your intended research's relevance to public health. So pay very close attention to these. I think that they can be really good exercises as you're trying to define what you want to do and figure out if it's a good fit for the NIH. So you might look at the specific requirements for the specific award you're going out for, and write a few drafts in response to these requirements. Let's zero in on exactly what they're asking for. First, I just want to quickly overview goals and objectives. We sometimes use these terms interchangeably. For federal agencies, they are distinct. A goal is a broad and overarching statement, what you wish to accomplish, summarizes usually in a single sentence what you hope to achieve at the end of the research project. You might even just start writing, the overarching goal of this project is to, and then use a verb and continue from there. An objective or aim, to use the NIH specific language, outlines the specific steps that you will take to achieve your overarching goal. So if the goal is the umbrella, the objectives are the bullet points underneath the steps that you will take to achieve them. Objectives, this is a bit of grant writing 101, should be SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time constrained. I'll revisit this slide a little bit later in the presentation. I introduce it here now in case you haven't seen this particular initialism. And these are really just good. This is just good advice in all forms of grant writing and in academic writing as well. I just want to encourage you to avoid, study and examine and look and see as the kind of key objective to a research. That's not measurable. It's not highly specific. It's not unique to you. It's not unique to your field, and it's not moving the discipline forward. So consider this. We'll revisit it in a little bit. So let's zero in on that project narrative. This is the 3 sentences, the relevance to public health statement. This particular guideline screenshot is from the Career Development Instructions for NIH and other agencies document. It can be found online. It's a thrilling read. He says with a bit of sarcasm, no, it is worth reading because it outlines all the steps you'll need to do. Important to consider, though, that the funding opportunity announcement for the particular award you're applying to will be kind of guideline number 1, whereas this overarching guideline will be sort of guideline number 2. But let's look at what they're asking for the project narrative attachment. The relevance of the research to public health in at most 3 sentences. This needs to be bite-sized. NIH applicants can describe how in the short or long term the research would contribute fundamental knowledge or the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. We see those 3 things repeated. If the application is funded, this public health relevance statement will be combined with the project summary, which is the longer statement, and will become public information. It's so public that you can find many examples of current awards and past awards on reporter.nih.gov. I find that doing a close reading of some successful statements is a good way to kind of develop your own strategies for crafting your own. So I include these as just teaching tools in a way. I invite you to kind of explore what's currently being funded by your particular IC or institute and center. I invite you to explore what's currently being funded by your particular award mechanism, and get a sense of if you can, also pull something off of that ilk. So here's one example from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. I'm going to look at my clock here and give you about 30 seconds to read through it to yourself. This is particular. This is a particular to cardiovascular disease. Okay, so what we see happening here is basically the researcher is identifying a overarching need for this research, a leading cause of death worldwide, definitely needs to be studied. And then we're start broad and we're gonna zero in. And then the researcher identifies where the gap is in the current research related to cardiovascular disease in the second sentence. Finally, the researcher concludes the statement with a statement of their goal to study the targeted delivery of therapeutics using cell-mediated therapeutic delivery coupled with next-generation nanoparticle synthesis technology. So not only does the goal state what they're going to do to fill that gap or address that barrier, it gestures towards a transformative or particularly new or innovative approach. So this is playing right into what NIH states they want to do. Let's look at another couple of examples across institutes and centers. This one is from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. We're here in Houston, so this might have resonance for many of you. In the United States, tropical cyclones such as hurricanes and tropical storms have a devastating effect on society. Okay, big, broad, overarching problem to address. Yet, a comprehensive assessment of their health impacts is still lacking, a gap to be addressed. The proposed research is relevant to public health because it focuses on quantifying the hospitalization and mortality burden of tropical cyclones while also characterizing physical factors that drive differences and impacts on vulnerable communities. So we have a statement of relevance to public health, and it ties in with the methods and the approach the researcher will use. And so they're look at how specific they are, quantifying certain burdens, characterizing, these are specific verbs, right? Physical factors and impacts on vulnerable communities. So we have this other factor that's a huge selling point for NIH as well. And then a statement of intended results or outcomes. The results of this project are expected to greatly benefit understanding of the health impacts of tropical cyclone exposure and to create actionable results that identify the most vulnerable communities. So pretty ambitious, largely data gathering. It's an interesting approach, I think, for NIH. So you can see, the difference in some of these different kinds of projects. One more quick one, and this is from the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. PRO's research and career development plans seek to investigate maladaptive avoidance learning as the principal mechanism of AUD, a condition suffered by 15 million adults in the United States alone. I love those big, broad opening statements that signal to the reviewer using some statistic or relevant information why this particular area is worth investing in. All right, now we have a statement of approach. Avoidance learning is complex, involving multiple neural, physiological, behavioral, and psychological processes, and currently underexplored, a gap to be addressed. The study proposes to directly examine these processes and identify the risk factors for the maintenance and relapse of AUD, thus potentially offering implications for the diagnosis, treatment, and ultimately the prevention of alcoholism. So we have particular results for the research plan, and then we push those results outward and to becoming broader impacts. So I show you those to prepare you for a little networking exercise. This is very low stakes, and I'm hoping that we find it an enjoyable, perhaps even social 15 minutes. You had a little worksheet to fill out prior to the meeting, which included questions from the Heilmeyer Catechism. These are really good questions to consider just outlining any sort of scientific grant proposal, but I think they definitely apply here as well. So I invite you, we're going to break out into breakout rooms here in about 2 minutes. And here's what I would like for you to do. We're gonna hop around the room, and you're gonna be in groups of about 5 or so. What I would like for you to do is go around one by one. Use this as a springboard to introduce yourself, and share out loud a statement about what you'd like to do. Now, not every one of you are going to have a very specific research project in mind yet, and that's fine. If that is the case, I invite you to share a statement around your career goals. Do you see yourself in 5 years being an independent researcher at an academic institution? What is the other avenue? If not, what is the other avenue you wish to take? How does research fit into that for you? These are all open-ended questions. I invite you to succinctly introduce yourself. And if you are reflecting on your research, say one thing about your overarching goal, your idea or your project's relevance to public health, the gap, need, or barrier to be addressed also applies to the relevance of public health, your methodology or approach, if you know it, and or your project's alignment with career goals. It's been an interesting 2 years. A lot of our networking opportunities have moved online. I apologize if this is something that you are very tired of doing. I invite you to indulge me and or your fellow participants in this presentation by just being a little open, being a little vulnerable, and be informal if you must. The goal of this exercise is to get comfortable with the art of the pitch. If we can squeeze down a whole K99 RO application into a 3-sentence summary, we should be able to state our career goals and objectives in conversation with one another. This is sometimes called an elevator pitch. It's a term often used in business. A succinct and persuasive sales pitch, right? And it's also a self-reflective exercise. So I'm including a bit of poetry to inspire us. I know poetry in an NIH presentation does not seem to apply, but I think Mary Oliver has a point here. We are only on this planet for a short amount of time. Let's let that motivate us to do something path-breaking and groundbreaking. And I invite Jessica to put us in our breakout rooms. So I have a screenshot here of how your rooms are broken down, at least rooms 5 through 7. I want to start with room 5, if I could. So between the 6 folks listed in room 5, could I ask for one brave volunteer to raise your hand using the raise hand function and share a little bit about what you talked about in the room? And this can be a 3-sentence statement around your research goal and objectives and their relevance to public health. It can be a statement of your career goals, but please, I see I have a volunteer. That was very quick. Michael, would you like to unmute yourself and share a statement about your goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main topic of discussion was in the point that we were in the presentation, like focusing our project towards a specific disease. I'm a bioinformatician, and so a lot of what I do as a pipeline can be multifaceted and involve multi things surrounding health. But we spoke mostly about how to tailor a system and how that relates to a disease and how it's novel or how no one has done this before. We should take a look at it and how it needs to be related and focused towards a disease.
Do you want to say that's really, really important? I think some of our examples, like the cardiovascular health one, was very much focused on issues related to a specific disease and approaches to treating that disease and researching it. Can you reveal a little bit about what your focus might be?
Yeah, absolutely. My focus is on the microbiome, and I work in the maternal fetal medicine department at Baylor College of Medicine. So we have projects ranging from preterm birth to type 2 diabetes to Zika virus, all sorts of things. And what my idea is to utilize a novel pipeline to integrate different types of microbiome sequencing, amplicon sequencing, and metagenomic shotgun sequencing into a unified and streamlined process that can ascertain the best of both of these technologies.
Absolutely. So a pretty specific approach with a wide application. And do you know which institute or center would be appropriate for this if you were to propose this?
Not yet.
Not yet. I think there's a couple of different avenues you could take. Thank you very much for sharing, Michael. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, move on. You'll see the names for room 6. Anybody in room 6 care to share? You're welcome to use the raised hand feature, and so I can identify you. I'm not a cruel educator. I will not be calling on people out of turn.
I can share, but I don't know how to use the raise your hand function.
Oh. Well, thank you then for unmuting and being bold and speaking up. I do appreciate it. Would just go ahead and identify yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about your project or your career goals.
Hi, my name is Junchen Liu. I work in University of Texas Medical School department, IBP department. So our lab primarily focuses on KRAS protein, and it's a dynamics on the plasma membrane. So, and we have in the break room time, we have people from different institutes. We have people study the neurodegenerative pathology. We also have people like me who study cancer biology, and also people who study alcoholic related pancreatitis. I hope I pronounce those terms correctly. But overall, I feel like most of our research is really closely match the mission of NIH.
Yeah. It sounds that way. Do you have a sense of, and it might be too early to tell, do you have a sense of what you would like to propose to do within that field? Yeah. Do you want to say a little bit about it?
So I'll give you a little background. So active RAS genes are one of the most frequently mutated genes in human cancer. So for example, KRAS is found in 90% of pancreatic cancer. So it's really a driving force for oncogenesis of different types of cancers. But currently, there is no available therapy for most of the KRAS mutant cancers, primarily because the G domain, which is the function domain of the protein, is very dynamic. Therefore, it's very difficult to target. So another important biology of RAS is that it has to be located to the plasma membrane and operate as a nanoclusters or oligomers to be functional. So therefore, if we can disrupt the membrane localization of KRAS, we might be able to find a new way to target the KRAS oncology. So in my research, we propose that as a subset of glycosphingolipid, which is localized to the outer leaflet of a plasma membrane, is very crucial for the membrane targeting and the nanoclustering of KRAS. Therefore, if we inhibit this pathway, we might be able to inhibit KRAS membrane localization and therefore oncology of KRAS cancers.
That is fascinating. And first of all, thank you very much for sharing details about your research. And I wanted to just highlight a couple of things, and that is your ability to identify the gap in the treatment options was stuck out to me. And then you were able to talk about the potential for a new innovation to sort of fill that gap. And I think continuing to kind of tailor your statement and your objectives in that direction would put you, on the right path to this particular award. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I'm going to pick on room 7 as well. I'd like to hear from just one more, at least, if we could. Someone from room 7. I see a list of names here. Would anybody like to raise their hand or just start talking? If not, oh, hello, Sarah. And how do you say your last name?
Serene.
Serene. Okay. Would you like to give us a taste of what you're thinking about pursuing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was also going to report that in our room, we only got to 2 people, but we did have a nice discussion about their work, and were able to kind of ask questions, and that was fun. So yeah, I can talk about my work. I study bilingual development in early childhood, and so it's a little different than some other people here, but I'm specifically interested in bilingual development in children that are also at risk for language difficulties. So they're, and especially at the time when they're starting school. And this is a problem because not only are there a growing number of children who may be experiencing language difficulties and speak languages other than English at home, but we don't have the kind of speech therapists and health professionals to always support them in the language that their family speaks. And so you do see a lot of children who lose the skills in their home language, and are kind of lose the ability to even communicate with family members oftentimes during this time. So what I'm looking at is tailoring kind of parent-focused programs that can support parents in using strategies and behaviors to support their child's language development in the home language during that transition to school period. And so what I'm thinking about for a K99 application is using lots of existing data that I have access to at my current position at the Children's Learning Institute at UT Health, to look at basically Spanish English bilingual children who had been part of previous randomized controlled trials of this parenting program, but then also for the kind of ROO portion to collect new data using a new version of the program that's more tailored to supporting specifically parents of bilingual children in helping their child maintain and continue to develop their home language. So that's I guess that's my nutshell.
That is really fascinating. Obviously, you're preaching to the choir here, because I'm very interested in my own child's language development at this point in time. But I also think that as you point out early on in your statement, there's a growing trend towards bilingual development, and a sort of, as you point out, I guess, downward trend in terms of maintaining that bilingual development. So that's really interesting. I had a question about which institute or center would be most responsive to this, and have you looked into that yet?
Yeah, I was kind of between the NICHD, the child health or child human development one, and the NIDCD, which is the deafness and communication disorders.
Yes.
And I just spoke to a program officer on Monday at the NIDCD, and she encouraged me to apply to send it to NIDCD because she said it's not, the ones that go to NICHD are oftentimes more kind of longitudinal observational studies. Yes. And because there's an intervention component, and I'm really looking at how can we improve interventions for children with language difficulties, she thought it fit better with NIDCD.
Excellent. And were you able to, so you pitched your idea to the program officer, were you able to send them a specific aims page? Sometimes they'll be able to give you feedback on a particular part of the proposal as well.
I did send him my aims, send her my aims, and yeah, I was able to get some feedback. Yeah, that was nice.
Well, that's great, and thank you for divulging and revealing so much. I think it's helpful for the group to hear different approaches you could take to ensuring that your project or your idea is aligned with the particular mission of the Institute or Center. And a very, very creative idea, and one I don't think I've seen or come across before. That doesn't mean much, but in any case, carry on, and thank you for sharing. So I'll have I think we should have time for just one more. If anybody is dying to go from rooms 1 through 4, and I will put those names up right now if you don't mind. Anyone from groups 1 through 4 wanting to share a little bit? We have about a minute. Yes, I see your hand. Is it Ashutosh?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I am talking on behalf of my group. So we have a lot of questions there at the time because a lot of people were from like they are in first year postdoc. So the first question is, wait, what is the best time to start applying for K99? Another question was whether because they are in the first year or second year, we are like so K99 says that your research should be different from your PI. So how they can work around with that PI? So that was the another question. And third question was, I don't know, can I put those questions? Third question was, can do we need to go to another institute for RO phase or can be in the same institute? So there were the three questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. I'll do my best to answer them in a short amount of time. There will be time for, I should have mentioned this up front, there will be time for a directed Q&A portion at the end between about 12:50 and 1 o'clock. So I'll be sure to do some Q&A at that point. But just to address in the three that you brought to me, the best time to apply for a K99 is largely dependent on what you're currently doing, what your mentor is currently doing, and if there is enough leverage, right, to move from that mentored phase into an independent phase. So the timing kind of needs to be right. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule about when you can apply, other than, of course, the 4-year window that applies. But basically, it kind of aligns with your second question, how to move away from your mentored research and into independent research. What you might want to consider is how can the mentored research that you're involved in now maybe generate pilot data, preliminary results, or methods that you will then use as a launching pad into your own research project. So it's all about just finding that. It's very specific to your own situation and your own relationship with your mentor and the work you're currently doing. But it is about finding that sweet spot between the skills you're learning now in a mentored capacity and how you can then grow them and apply them to a more independent program. I know that doesn't exactly give you, exactly the exact timing, but it is something to hopefully, reflect on as you're deciding whether or not it's the right move for you. And yes, for the rest of the group, we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end for directed Q&A. So if you have questions that come up throughout the presentation, I invite you to just jot them down on your own. Maybe I'll address them in a future slide. And if I don't, I'm happy to try to address them at the end during our evaluation and Q&A section. Other than that, I'll leave my email address up at the end. So if you have other questions around the grant process, you're welcome to reach out to me after the fact. So thank you to all 4 of you who shared and offered thoughts and questions and ideas. I think it's really helpful for the rest of the group to sort of model that process. So what I'm going to do now is jump right back in to the presentation, and we can kind of get into the nuts and bolts about preparing your, oh, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. One moment, please. We can get into the nuts and bolts about preparing your application. Many of you had questions about that. Okay, here we are, proposal preparation. Obviously, you're going to want to apply to the K Award. You will want to read the K Award guidelines and look at them against the SF 424, that's Standard Form 424 application guide. These will have everything that you will need to do and work on. The other thing that you could be doing right now is engaging with your postdoc mentor and or current organization to start thinking about your application and what can go into it. As you'll see, and as we get through a few of these requirements, the mentor's input is crucially important to your overall application. While the investment from NIH is going to be made to you, your mentor will be a pretty key component. And to the gentleman who spoke at the end there, I believe he asked, just about how to move from that. Well, your mentor could kind of help you establish a plan. How will the mentored activities and the training activities lead logically to an independent project? Let's look at the nuts and bolts of what NIH is going to be asking for in the proposal itself. It is a lot of little forms, and it's a lot of bits of writing to consider, and I'll try my best to just focus on the major forms. So the proposal components include a cover sheet, a project and performance site location. These are pretty pro forma, fill in the blank kind of forms. There is a whole attachment section called other project information, which is an interesting turn of phrase because it's also kind of essential project information, if you ask me. So this includes the project summary abstract, the 30-line summary. It includes the 3-sentence project narrative. It includes your bibliography, which shows that you've put in the research to support your plan, your facilities and other resources document, and your equipment document, which will reveal to the reviewers that you have the facility support and equipment at your disposal to pull off whatever it is you're trying to do. There's also a senior and key person profile form, a budget form as well, which is itemized for the K99 phase and not for the ROO phase, as I've mentioned before. So for your K99 phase, those research activities, evaluations, salary fringe, things like that, those will need to be listed out in a line in line items for the K99 award. For the ROO, it's just that $249,000. And then once you transition to your ROO, and you do not have to stay at the same institution, by the way. I believe that you can transition to that independent role at any point, and it's usually pretty attractive, I think, to employers if you're engaged in a K99 ROO award currently. Let's move on. The career development and award supplemental form. So this is really your narrative, as we call it in a general term. It's the longer text-driven, research-driven part of the proposal. And it's kind of broken down into 2 major sections, the candidate section and the research plan section. Candidate section is all about you. The research plan section is all about what you're going to do. And I've identified obviously NIH is investing in you, but that research strategy portion needs to be pretty airtight. They're going to be looking, by they, I mean the reviewers, are going to be looking for feasibility, attainability, and how well thought out, how well researched your strategy is. There's also a section for training in the responsible conduct of research. This is pretty much required, I think, by all NIH grants. They want a statement around the ethical considerations of your research. So start to think about that as well. The other major part is your mentor, co-mentor, consultant, and or collaborators part section. So these will include plans, statements, and letters of support from each of these people in as much as they are participating in your project. Environmental and institutional commitment to the candidate. These are also known as letters of institutional support. And there are also statements around the environment and your access to certain facilities and the support the organization is willing to give you. There are other sections required depending on the nature of your project. So if there are human subjects or clinical trials, you want to include that, assignment request forms, and of course, reference letters as needed. So let's zero in on the candidate section. The first required part is the candidate's background. It describes your commitment to a career in a field relevant to NIH's mission. So that's why it's important to consider those mission statements. Describe your potential to develop into a successful and independent investigator. So what skills have you developed? What skills are you still developing? And how will you leverage those developments into an independent program? The other candidate section bullet point to attend to is the career goals and objectives. So some of what we did in our breakout rooms. You want to present within this a scientific history that shows a logical progression from your prior research and training experiences to the training and research experience proposed for the mentor phase and then the independent phase. You might think of this as a past, present, and future sort of organization, if that's helpful to you. In my experience working with postdocs who are applying for K99, this can often be very difficult. And I just want to say to maybe take a deep breath and relax. No one can write about you as well as you. So keep that in mind. You've lived this, so you are qualified to write about it. And again, this justification, the need for further mentor support, it's again that gap or that niche. There's a gap or a niche in the research field that motivates your research. There might be a gap or a niche in your training or your mentorship that will motivate or justify the need for further mentored support. And then we have the kind of the future. The candidate's plan for career development and training activities during award period. You want to be specific and systematic. You want to be able to present the clear progression of events that will happen to obtain the background research experience and career development activities needed to launch your research career. Again, describe how those skills and knowledge obtained during the mentored phase will enhance research productivity and facilitate your development, and describe a plan to evaluate your progress during the mentored phase. If you've been involved in any sort of research projects, there might have been that have been published, there might have been evaluation components worked in. You can use some of that knowledge to develop your own, and your current organization might have people in an evaluation and assessment type office, or who might be qualified to help you put together a plan for that. And then we also want to talk about that transition. How will you make that step, take that next step? What stepping stone is the K99 providing for you, and how will you plant your feet on that stuff? The other major section, as I mentioned, is the research strategy. So this is what's traditionally known as a research plan or project narrative. As we know, project narrative means something different to NIH. The research strategy must span both phases of the award. It must state the significance, innovation, and approach, 3 key criterion of the proposed research during the K99 and RO phases. And it must describe the relationship between the mentor's research and the candidate's proposed research. So how are you going to leapfrog off of that? Oh, one more quick point. Sorry to go back. This is in relation to the question that was asked in the previous section. Describe how you will gain independence from this mentored research and separate your research from your mentors. You also want to ensure, and this is very important, that you are able to take this project with you wherever you end up. So that is an important component in talking with your mentor and ensuring their support. How are you able to keep this as your own? Let's look at the mentor, co-mentor, consultant, and collaborations section. What this section is, it's largely, again, written or signed by the other people involved in your career development, but it will probably need to be developed in tandem with your mentor. So establishing some expectations, making those requests early on in the process, super important. Here's what NIH will be looking for. The research qualifications and previous experience as a supervisor, the nature of the supervision and mentoring, the elements of the planned research training and career development, including any coursework, the plan for transitioning you from mentored phase to independence, the components of the proposed research that the applicant can take when transitioning to independence, very important. Description of any resources that can be taken to the independent phase of the award, if applicable. So this part differs from the next section, which are letters from support. They might have a little bit of overlap, but we want to see formal letters of support on institution letterhead from any collaborators, contributors, and consultants involved in the project. So maybe there's a specialist doing some of the research with you. Maybe again, there are evaluators or assessors working on the project, and maybe there are some assistants in some capacity. Or maybe there are additional mentors overseeing what you're proposing. In any case, these letters of support are important, and they do get read. Reviewers do read letters of support. Description of the institutional environment. Sometimes this exists in a boilerplate capacity at your given organization. They might have set language that they use to describe the particular lab or resources you'll be taking advantage of to mount this research. Other times you'll need to determine this yourself. So just speak with whoever is involved in a sponsored projects office, speak to your mentor, your collaborators, and your colleagues about how to put this institutional environment section together. It's about building capacity and showing the reviewers at NIH that you have access to all the necessary facilities and resources to pull off the research. The institutional commitment is slightly different than facilities and support. It has to do with person months and effort. And it also has to do with the time and support for your mentor as well. So we kind of breeze through a number of those proposal components. Again, they are all in the FOA. I tried to summarize them as best I can and present them as bullet points. You should do the same yourself. Read through the funding opportunity announcement, read through any additional specific guidelines unique to your project or unique to your institute or center, and plan ahead. Here are the standardized due dates from NIH. These typically do not change year to year. They're on 3 different cycles: February, June, and October. Considering it is March, unless you're well on your way through this application, I would not recommend trying to hit a June deadline unless you have a lot of things already, a lot of plates already spinning in the air, so to speak. But you might consider February or even October if you can kind of get moving. And then there's a separate, important, in case this applies to anybody present, there is a separate cycle of due dates for renewal, resubmission, or revision. So sometimes if NIH gives you a pretty good application review, but it was ultimately not funded, you may want to shoot your shot again and go out for a resubmission, making some necessary revisions and ensuring you have a stronger case the second time around. These are on a slightly different timeline. So make note and work backwards from that due date. What is possible? I would say that, I don't know, you need at least 6 months to a year. I mean, even 6 months is pushing it, but just to consider all the resources you need to put into play and all the support you need to ensure. And that brings us into our best practices for grant writing. So I don't want to scare you away from applying. I do think that you need to consider success rates. You do need to consider alignment, your abilities as a researcher, your goals, and your ability to put together a pretty complicated document. So I want to give you this little graphic and just try to indicate that writing is a process. Rarely are you going to be submitting the first draft. It's an art and a science. And what I mean is that it's a practice that exists on a continuum. We refine and build off our prior efforts. The work is never truly done until it's officially out the door in someone else's hand. So be patient with yourself and try to think of writing as a continual process as well. The best advice I can give you for grant writing is to plan, and plan some more. First thing you might do is create a contact list. Who is involved? Who do you want to have involved? Ensure buy-in early. So get that pitch ready and use these contacts to help refine your pitch. Create a feasible production schedule. I'll give you an example in a couple of slides. Like I said, start with your intended deadline and sort of back into your schedule, keeping in mind that there's a lot of different components that are going to go into a completed application. Include in your schedule all proposal planning tasks and all proposal components. Consider that tasks and components or each component might have several tasks, excuse me. Here are some common proposal planning tasks. This is one way to look at it. There might be a planning stage, a writing stage, and sort of a processing or revision stage, right? Here we are in the planning stage where you're finding your topic, organizing your goals. You're looking at other projects that are currently being funded. You're studying the instructions. You're reaching out to the program officer, and you're contacting your mentors and colleagues to see what is possible. You might have, your second stage might be writing and budgeting, where you're drafting, you're vetting, you're researching your own research plan. You're having people reviewing it and incorporating suggestions. You might include graphic support, charts, graphs, images, figures to support what you're proposing. Figures can go a long way to ensuring that your proposal is legible in some way, right? And then of course the budget considerations as well. And then you might have kind of a final section where you're finalizing everything, you're getting internal approvals, you're proofreading, and you're making those final edits. I'm a big fan of the Gantt chart. You might use this when you're drafting the timeline for your research project as well. It's a nice handy visual element that breaks down tasks into blocks of time. It shows that you've considered the long-term effort that will go into your research project. Here, I've just given you one example. It might be a completely different timeline and a completely different list of tasks, depending on your proposal. Here's one way you can organize your time. And if you see all the different steps, I do think that the big picture things like your initial concept and pilot data, preliminary results, program officer, ensuring support from your mentors and how that will work, try to get those things going now. The fine tuning the language and so forth, you can do that right up until the deadline. As we zero in though on grant writing, it's important to consider the similarities and differences between academic writing and grant writing. They're sometimes considered distinct genres, and sometimes I think journal article and journal article moves get inserted into grant proposals, and they're not doing the work that investigators think they're doing. So we're going to look at some of the similarities and differences there. So as you know, your academic writing will include your thesis, dissertation, scholarly papers, or articles. You might have authored a few yourself. You might have been listed on a few yourself. Grant writing includes a completely different set of writing skills necessary to win grants. I think the difference lies in the marketability. So let's look at the similarities first. Both articles and proposals tell a research story, right? There's a narrative component. Here's what we did, or here's what we proposed to do, and here are the results. They signal importance of key findings to the field, discipline, or other scholars. They set up a research territory or niche, or identify a gap, right? What's missing in the current field, and here's why this work is important. These are the similarities. They're embedded in a larger conversation. I want to encourage you all to consider yourselves active participants in a larger scientific biomedical conversation that is ongoing. And your research is part of that conversation. They adopt a deductive structure. There are claims and objectives at the lead. The bottom line, what you want to pull off is usually front-loaded, right? In an abstract or a goals statement. We're anticipating an audience with expertise, and there might be a little bit of a difference in the expertise. So journal articles obviously are going to be read by other researchers in the field. Grant proposals are going to be read by a panel of grant reviewers who are going to be experts in the field, but are going to also be looking at the project's potential to appeal to the public, to taxpayers, to Congress. So there's a bit of a broader audience to consider there. They both use jargon, disciplinary terminology, but they use them slightly differently. So we'll go into the differences here. You can probably tell by the similarities that there are some key differences. So academic writing is scholarly pursuit. Grant writing is in a spirit of service. We're pursuing goals, lofty goals set forth by a federal agency. Academic writing, this is a key difference, rooted in the past, usually have past tense verbs. This is something that we've already done. Grant writing is more future oriented. This is something that we will do, something that I plan to do, I aim to do. This is future oriented. There, of course, might be pilot data preliminary work to be worked in. Academic writing is theme-centered, whereas grant writing is project-centered. Academic writing is expository, we're explaining, whereas grant writing is a little bit more persuasive. We're selling the project and its abilities. Tone is reflective of that. There could be kind of an objective or dispassionate tone to many journal articles that I'm sure you might be familiar with at this point in your careers. Grant writing, on the other hand, I think, can convey a little more excitement around the possibilities that we're proposing. So it can be a bit more personal. Obviously, there's a whole candidate section where you get to talk about yourself and your own plans. So take advantage of that personality, harness it. I would not advise you be overly informal or overly familiar. Definitely keep a sophisticated tone when presenting your own unique abilities, but also be sure to work in a little bit of that excitement. Academic writing can be individualistic, but obviously, you know, there are a huge amount of team effort involved. Whereas grant writing, you need to get a lot of feedback. Academic writing, journal articles can be quite verbose. Grant writing, you have very strict length constraints. Academic writing, jargon is a little more permissible, whereas grant writing, we want things in general to be easily understood. That doesn't mean you want to do away with jargon entirely. I do say, I do advise to not use it too much, particularly in those one-pager statements, but try to keep accessibility in your mind and write for a broader audience than you would. All right, so the key difference, of course, are the orientation, the audience, and the risk. So let's look a little bit at what we got here. Journal article reports in the past, proposals are oriented towards the future. Journal articles are of interest to scholars in the field. Proposals are of interest to scholars and funders and the public. Journal articles make valuable contributions. Proposals suggest a good investment. They're going to be spending their money to make those contributions. There's typically a lower risk for journal articles. Obviously, you want your methods to be peer reviewed. You want your work to be double checked. You want that research to move the field forward. Proposal, there's a higher risk. You're putting a lot of effort and time into something that just might get a no. Journal articles inform and explain, proposals persuade. This is just a repeat. Again, let's review these SMART objectives. I think a lot of grant writing comes down to objectives and your ability to articulate them. And so you want to be precise about what you're going to do. What evidence will you produce to show that you have reached your goal, measurable? You want to be able to show that you're not attempting too much, but you're occupying a niche. And this is an interesting caveat: a less ambitious but completed objective is better than an over-ambitious one that you cannot achieve. And I think grant reviewers are pretty savvy to that. They'll know when you're over-promising. So that goes into being realistic. Do you have the resources, the time, the money, the support, the skills to achieve the objective? Oops, and time constrained. Are your objectives time constrained in that there's a schedule and a flow to that schedule and enough time to achieve those objectives? Let's zero in on some verbs that can help you define your objective. Again, I push investigators away from study or examine or look or see. These are not specific. These are not measurable. Here are some measurable verbs to use when you are stating your objectives. Be very specific. It's all going to come back to those goals and objectives at the end of the day, as well as your capacity, of course. But here's a few categories. Look at how much more specific these are. So if you want to evaluate something, maybe you mean you want to appraise, assess, critique, or determine something. If your goal is to analyze something, be more specific. Are you ordering it? Are you grouping it? Are you translating or detecting or inferring something? Be specific about the actual processes you're proposing. I do think verbs are incredibly important, particularly as they apply to goals and objectives. As we said, these are future-oriented proposals for work. So you want to be very specific about what you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. Here are a couple of slides just around general grant writing tips and tricks that I hope you will take to heart. And these are from, developed from experience in my own work. These are developed from expertise from other PIs. These are developed from expertise from other grant writers. So it's kind of a catch-all list. I hope that they're helpful. First, know your sponsor. Mirror those key phrases and terminology. The NIH wants to combat infectious diseases and your work will advance that goal. Say so. Use that term and phrase. Don't plagiarize, of course, but maybe mirror it. Use active voice where possible and future verb tense. So try to avoid that passive voice construction with the thought, with the knowledge that what you're doing is proposing a plan, right? So we want it to be actionable. Obviously, certain fields and certain disciplines have standards of passive voice construction. I'm thinking particular of areas in the natural sciences that tend to be constructed in more passive ways, obviously right within the confines of your discipline. But when proposing your plan, try to keep it active. You're allowed to use first-person voice. I don't know where this fear of first-person voice came from. Don't be too informal, of course, but you're welcome to say my project, my goals, I, we. You're welcome to use that. It actually might help in some ways in defining kind of who you are and why you're a good candidate. Balance, like I said, scholarship with actions. Contextualize your proposed work with literature and extend those boundaries. Support your aims and claims. Avoid empty value judgments. If you're saying something is cutting edge, groundbreaking, path-breaking, novel, innovative, you better have the detail and research to back that up. Those words and phrases tend to be bandied about, and we really need to support that with the good stuff. So again, avoid study and examine, use something concrete and measurable. Lead with your exciting ideas. Don't bury the lead. Put that stuff up front. Write with funders and reviewers in mind. And consider the question, why are you uniquely deserving? What is it about your specific interest, your specific experience that makes you the ideal candidate for this work? And why are you able to pull it off? A few more tips and tricks. Seek counsel on your concept before writing, maybe from a PO. Start the conversation with your mentor. Collaborate across colleges and institutions, maybe across different departments, for instance. Interdisciplinary work is sometimes a huge selling point. Always have someone proofread, maybe someone outside the scientific field if you can get them. Follow all formatting directions. Don't ignore formatting directions. If certain formatting directions like margins, font size, etc., are not followed, your proposal can be returned without review. We don't want that to happen. Grammar and sentence structure do matter. And I would, this is not a hard and fast rule, but I would, when you're reviewing your work, flag any sentences more than 3 lines on a page long. We can get lost in the details sometimes. Again, we want this to be an accessible document. Be precise with your word choice. Vary your word choice a little bit if you can. And then a useful exercise, describe your project to your mother. What I mean to say is describe your project to someone who might not be as attuned to the biomedical field, and read the proposal out loud. Read your stuff out loud. It'll help you figure out, your ears can hear things that your eyes miss. So it'll help you find out where it is not being clear. So I hope that those were some helpful tips and tricks. These slides will be shared at the end of the presentation. I do want to go through the review process rather quickly. Hopefully this is helpful for you. All of this information is online. Suffice it to say, it's a pretty rigorous review process, and there is a specific panel usually related to your field of study. So being sure that you're writing to the institute or center, and to the general NIH reviewer is important. There's a scoring system that is used. There's a criterion score and an overall impact score, and it's detailed there. And there will be a study section meeting following that will produce a summary statement that you will receive at the end of the review process. We'll go into exactly what this criteria is and how the scoring works next. So here is how NIH scores. It's on a 1 through 9 scale, 1 being exceptional, 9 being the worst, poor. Typically, you're not going to see very many 1s or 9s. A lot of these reviews tend to occupy that middle space, 4, 5, 6, very good, good, satisfactory. And what we want to do is try to push our grants to really get into the high overall impact scoring area, exceptional, outstanding, excellent, where you've just considered everything through. So what are we writing to? What criteria are we trying to appeal to? Well, there are 5 scored criteria: significance, the investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. A couple of these you probably don't have control over. Environment, you're existing, you're working, you're researching in a particular place. But we want to make sure that all of those environmental resources are accounted for. I think the rest of these, though, you do have control over how that will be presented. So let's go into what they mean. Significance: does the project address an important problem or critical barrier to progress in the field? Is the prior research that serves as the key support for the proposed project rigorous? Has it been thought through? If the aims of the project are achieved, how will knowledge, capability, or practice be improved? Articulate that. This is the significance. Why is it important? Investigator: this is all about you and your abilities. Are the PI, collaborators, and other research well suited to the project? If an early stage investigator, such as yourselves, do they have appropriate experience and training? Hugely important to the K99. How is that training laid out? If established, have they demonstrated an ongoing record of accomplishments that have advanced their fields? This has to do too with the NIH biosketch and your publication history. We want those documents too, those ancillary documents to kind of speak to other parts of the proposal. So do you have what it takes? They're going to evaluate you and how you present yourself. Innovation: not the same as significance, not the same as approach. This is answering the question, does the application challenge and seek to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms by utilizing novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, including instrumentation or interventions? We want to see how this is new and how paradigms are going to be disrupted or advanced. We want to see new approaches so that your claim for innovation can be held up. Approach: this is more about the attainability of your research strategy and the logical progression of your objectives and activities, how they work together to achieve your goal. It answers the question, are the overall strategy, methodology, and analyses well reasoned and appropriate to accomplish the specific aims of the project? Have the investigators included plans to address weaknesses in the rigor of prior research that serves as the key support for the proposed project? This is turning a particular liability into an asset. Where is the gap in the project? How does your approach occupy that gap, tear down that barrier? You'll also want to consider any risks involved. What does an unsuccessful project look like? What happens if it doesn't work as planned? Have you worked in plan B? Have you worked in plans to mitigate these risks? That's all part of the approach criteria. Finally, environment. Will the scientific environment in which the work will be done contribute to the probability of success? This is why you need institutional support at this stage. And this is why you need the support of your mentors, colleagues, and collaborators as well. So reviewers will kind of aggregate. They'll get together and provide an overall impact score to reflect their assessment of a likelihood for the project to exert a sustained, sustainability, reproducibility, powerful influence on the research field involved, in consideration of the following review criteria and additional review criteria as applicable to the funding mechanism or the institute and center you're applying to. So that was a very quick summary of the review process. I'm sorry you didn't get to spend more time on it. I do need to transition to the kind of leading us out of the presentation. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your participation and your attention today. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And I wish you the best of luck in your endeavors. So in the next few minutes, we're going to have you fill out an evaluation survey for today's workshop. We'd like you to do this here in the last few minutes before 1 o'clock. There's a SurveyMonkey link. I think it's going to be dropped in the chat. Yes, Jessica has just dropped it in the chat. While you are doing that, I'd like to also invite you to jot down your questions. If you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll regroup and answer questions in about 3 minutes or so. So go ahead and take your time with the survey. If you need a little extra time while we're doing Q&A to finish your survey, go right ahead. With that, I want to leave this slide up for you. In case you'd like my email address or office phone number, you're welcome to contact me for any general advice around this process. I'm always happy to answer questions if I'm able to answer them. So thank you all. I'm going to go on mute and we'll come back in about 3 minutes to address any Q&As you might have. Thank you. For objectives. And again, make them attainable. Don't set up your objectives so that objective 2 is entirely dependent on the successful completion of objective 1. They need to somehow exist independently so that work can continue, even if the desired outcome isn't achieved in objective 1. Another strategy, another approach is to think about your research plan as research thrusts, as in a sense. So within each thrust, there might be a couple of objectives or a couple of activities, right? So a research activity is something you do. An objective is still like a goal, something you're kind of pursuing. I hope that that helps maybe break it down a little bit more. Is it true that we need more than one mentor to get a K99? I don't know that. I don't know that to be true. I don't think it could hurt to have more support for your mentored phase. It also shows a lot of commitment being placed on you and a lot of faith being put in you to the reviewers. Can I move to a new lab for postdoc after getting a K99? I'm not sure about that. Obviously, you're going to be ideally at a new institution for the ROO. Moving labs during the K99, I'm not sure. I think that that's definitely a question for someone who's done that, or a question for your particular program officer. Sorry, I couldn't answer that one. Is it important for the mentor to have a record of past trainees receiving K99s? It's important for the mentor to have a record of past trainees. Absolutely. I think having a set of experience in that regard is important. I don't think it can hurt if they have a lot of past K99s. As we've indicated, though, there aren't that many on record. There's 50 to 60, I think we determined over the last 10 years just in our geographical area. So obviously, if they have a past K99, you'll want to put that in the application. The window, excuse me, did I miss any? No, the window of eligibility for K99 award is no more than 4 years in a postdoc position. Specific requirements surrounding intellectual property. That's an interesting question. There are specific requirements surrounding intellectual property. I did not go over them because they're highly technical, and you'll need to look at the actual funding opportunity announcement and then the focus areas and any sort of regulations around your institute or center and how they approach intellectual property. Typically, too, there might be a data management component in which you'll address IP issues. Basically, this is for the benefit of mankind. So we want this as open, want data as open as possible. That's a good rule of thumb to consider. And any sort of institution or organization will typically have data management policies that will allow for licensing and access and things like that. So you'll just want to ask those questions to the appropriate office. I know we're a little bit over. Thank you for your patience. If there are any further questions, you're welcome. Oh, the eligibility window has some extensions because of COVID. That's important to know. Do check that out. That might be dependent on the particular K99 mechanism you're looking at as well. So do check that out. Yes, I think you're right. It did get extended due to COVID. So I'm not sure exactly, but that is worth looking into. If there are further questions, feel free to email me. I'm leaving my email address in the chat. I do need to conclude. And I'll pass it back to Karen and Jessica. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, John. And everybody
Yes,
for
thank
coming
you.
today.
Yes, thank you. Everyone have a great day, and we will be communicating with you via email. So look for those emails. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.